仮装店。俺はピカソの絵の良さがわかんない。俺でも描けそうじゃない？
People often say that the first step is always the hardest. You're diving into completely unknown territory with only your hope and optimism to keep you afloat, so that you don't drown in the ocean of uncertainty and hardships. It's pretty dumb if you think about it though. Why would people want to expose themselves to something they aren't familiar with? Why are we willing to get ourselves hurt over something that might not even work out in the end? Why do we feel the need to change and push ourselves, instead of just settling with what we have? While we're encouraged to step out of our comfort zone and think outside of the box, these notions are quickly dismissed with a certain set of societal rules. Go to school, get a 9-to-5 job, get married, have kids, etc., etc. And I feel like our main character, Yatora Yaguchi, is a prime example of this way of thinking. He's a delinquent, but he still works hard in school. Having a hobby is good and all, but it's irresponsible and unreasonable to think that someone would risk their livelihood to pursue something that they love. This is why Yaguchi feels so empty though. He never had something he was truly passionate about, something that he wanted to do, and by extension, something he chose to do of his own volition. His own logic narrowed his mind so much that I feel like he was afraid to explore any other possibilities. If Yaguchi was going to do something, he was going to do it to the best of his abilities. At least, that's the impression I got. He says he's not interested in art, but he never actually gave it a chance. Art is more than just the drawing. It's a language without words, a medium that allows anyone to project their feelings in abstract ways to convey a message that can only be felt and read on a canvas. It only becomes more clear with how much passion the artist puts into their work. The more honest you are with yourself, the more enjoyable it'll be, thus making art hard to fake. A major turning point in the story was when Yaguchi saw Mori's angel painting. It was the first time an art piece spoke to him, and he was captivated by not only its looks, but how it was created. He wanted to replicate the feeling he got into his own, and for the first time, he was able to genuinely communicate with someone. He tried to express how pretty early morning Shibuya was to one of his friends, but he quickly dismissed it as Yaguchi being corny. This time, however, he was able to recreate that scene, making it easier for his friends to understand what he meant. Emphasis on what he meant. Yaguchi has always been someone who was good with words. He always knew what to say given the situation he was in, but again, he was never able to say what he truly felt. He mocked Ryuji for applying himself in the arts, but maybe he was jealous. Maybe everything he said about art being a waste of time was a way of telling himself that he was wasting his time studying and playing it safe. Although he knew he'd be better off pursuing something more reasonable, the fact that he still felt empty and was bored of the same thing stands true. Yaguchi appeases his surroundings a bit too much, which isn't a bad thing per se, but more of a bad habit. It's in his nature to always follow the rules and say things that other people want to hear. That's the only way he knows how to communicate. It hadn't allowed him to find what he truly values, nor did it help him understand his true feelings.
そう、俺の問題だ。なら一体、この感動は誰のものだ？他人の努力の結果、お前のことじゃない。俺も、これは俺の感動じゃない。
Yaguchi has always been giving it his all when it comes to school, but none of it ever felt worthwhile. It was when he drew his blue painting that he was able to connect with others. I'm sure Yaguchi has been praised for his academic skills, but being praised for his art was something he'd never expected. He actually felt good for once, and a bit embarrassed for a talent that he never knew he had. Not only that, it was praised for something he was actually proud of. He's starting to appreciate the intricacies in art, and learns that it isn't something you can do on a whim, nor is it something that anyone can just pick up and be a pro at the very beginning. Once it grabbed his attention, Yaguchi started drawing instinctively, as if to recreate that feeling of being absorbed in your own work. Art is just a hobby. It's a waste of time. It's irresponsible. The more he told himself this, the more reasons he gave himself to draw. Art is just a hobby, but he wants to improve. It's a waste of time, but he wants to recreate the scenery he saw. It's irresponsible, but he wants a place where he can express how he feels. Teachers can give all the practical reasons on why people attend an art school, but that's too much of an adult way of thinking. Kids who can't work hard are those who don't have any passion. It's only natural for people to gravitate towards things that they're passionate about. A lot of the time, it's the only thing keeping them sane. It gives people a way to escape from the societal norms and challenge them in ways they never experienced. In other words, you never know what'll happen if you don't try. I mentioned this earlier, but Yaguchi doesn't seem like the type to half-step anything. We can see how genuinely curious he is about all the techniques he's learning, and seeing firsthand just how amazing some people are compared to himself. Despite the obvious skill gap, he doesn't seem to get discouraged. Instead, he pushes himself to practice harder than anyone else because he wants to at least be on equal footing as his fellow peers. He comes in early to get a head start on practice, and even asks if he could do more than what's required of him. It just shows how serious he is about art. Yaguchi is beginning to broaden his sense of vision, and notices things about others and himself that he paid no mind to previously. Episode 2 is where we see one of the most impactful moments from the show. He couldn't find a specific reason as to why he wanted to attend an art school. It was just something he knew he wanted. Art allowed him to see things he couldn't before, properly express his emotions, and taught him that there was more than meets the eye. He realized how much his mother cared for his family, and all the little things she did day in and day out. He apologized for all the things he's taken for granted, but asked if he could be selfish one more time, because he finally found something he wanted to dedicate his life to. I can say from first-hand experience that deviating from the quote-unquote safe path isn't easy, and it's even more challenging to try to convince those close to you that everything will be fine, especially since you're not entirely sure of the outcome either. But just having someone tell you that they trust you and believe that you can succeed means the absolute world to them. No matter how many times I've watched this episode, it never fails to bring me to tears, because of how relatable it is to me and the countless others who wanted to pursue their dreams. Straying away from what's right and comfortable is something we must all do at some point, and Yaguchi learned just how brutal it is to chase your ambitions.
でも好きなことだから頑張れるんじゃない？
好きなことをやるっていつでも楽しいって意味じゃないよ、母さん。
It's in our own nature to compare ourselves to others and feel envious of something that we don't have. We start to regret why we haven't started earlier. At the same time, you can't just give up because of this. Geniuses aren't born. They're just regular people who worked hard to get to where they are. To dismiss this would just be ignorance on your end, because it's no different from giving up. Yaguchi has never once considered himself to be talented or a genius, but being surrounded by so much immense talent, he can't help but beat himself up over his own insecurities. Although he's doing what he loves, that doesn't make it any less difficult. His once carefree attitude of wanting to create something cool became more and more critical of his work. On one hand, it shows just how serious he is, but you have to keep in mind that he'd just gotten into art, while the people around him have been drawing for most of their life. In some cases, it was the only thing they had going for them. It's safe to say that Yaguchi wasn't prepared to take in so much information at once. He was going in blind and hoping that one out of the dozens of pieces he created was considered good art. Ever since starting cram school, Miss Oba told Yaguchi to find what he loves and taught him the importance of composition. Yaguchi only did half of that. He put too much of his focus on studying composition and imitating pieces that he found interesting. Although they looked fine on the surface, they were still lacking something, and for a while, he didn't know what it was. Why is it that he didn't get the same wow factor he experienced when looking at Mori or Kuwana's art whenever he looked at his own? Artists draw on their creativity, emotions, and passion. They're painting themselves in abstract ways and putting their own spin on different topics. Yaguchi, unfortunately, didn't have this artistic sense. Sure, he was applying all the technical skills he learned, but that's all his art was. There weren't many pieces that he made that were truly unique to him. He was missing the point. Yaguchi is very by the books, and his studious nature is recognized immediately by his cram school teacher, Yatosuke, Hashida, Ryuji, pretty much everyone. For the most part, all he was doing was drawing what was in front of him, or what was assigned to him. But the people who got accepted were ones who had a broad worldview, people who can think outside of the box, and people who can genuinely have fun with art without worrying what others will think of them. But Yaguchi can't help but take things personally because, again, he'd just gotten into art. Yatosuke found it odd and frustrating that Yaguchi would want to overstep his boundaries. He already had everything. He didn't have to choose art. But why is he here? Yatosuke told him that he was missing the whole point of what makes art, art. He doesn't believe that he's taking it seriously, and he honestly felt offended that someone like Yaguchi was trying to become something he's not. Naturally, Yaguchi took offense, claiming that he's working just as hard, if not harder than everyone else. In fact, it's because of people like Yotosuke that he has no choice but to put in the extra mile, because he knows he's not a genius. Instead of dwelling on his comments, he turned that frustration into motivation. Yaguchi loves art. It's taken over his life ever since he painted Early Morning Shibuya. He wanted nothing more than to prove to himself and others that he could make good art. This just goes full circle to what I said about geniuses. Although Yotosuke saw Yaguchi as such, he didn't know what he had to sacrifice to get to where he is, or how much he had to learn to get himself up to speed with everyone else. All Yaguchi needs now is to have some faith in his own art. Over time, we see Yaguchi struggling more and more with his identity. He didn't have a message to say, nor did he know what he wanted to say with his art. He's become quote-unquote good by learning all the various techniques, but how good an art isn't determined by technique alone. He kept telling himself that he wasn't able to draw without a model. He didn't know how to interpret an abstract idea. His lack of self-confidence began to show as he felt the brush getting heavier. Perhaps he was at his limit. Although he was able to recreate his Bond painting, it wasn't long until he was back to square one. Episode 7 is another big revelation and my favorite episode in the show so far. What Yaguchi was missing was self-centeredness. This was hinted at when he visited the university and wondered why all the art pieces were self-centered. In order for him to succeed, he had to change his approach. Focusing on covering your weakness is more of a test-taking strategy. Being a good and obedient student is only valuable in a mandatory school setting. With art, you can tell if an artist is enjoying themselves just by looking at the piece. Yaguchi has a habit of overthinking things. He's trying to force himself to understand what it means to have fun. He's trying to completely abandon who he was instead of adapting. He didn't want to be studious if it meant not being able to create what he wants. There was also his fear of failure. How can he possibly enjoy himself when he's putting everything on the line to attend a school of his dreams? He doesn't want to fail, but in order to do that, he has to have fun. But how does he have fun with art? And will having fun really help him with the exams? It's all just unreasonable and irresponsible. Yaguchi had forgotten what it meant to be free. He'd always been insecure about what others think of him, which explains why he doesn't talk about himself. He reads the room well and says things that other people want to hear. This translated directly into his art because he only drew what he was told to draw, and believed that deviating from this would get him rejected. He works hard because he doesn't want to show his weakness. He builds others up, but he never does the same for himself. He hadn't realized it before, but he was reverting back to who he was. That same emptiness he felt when he was studying was now a fear of drawing. This is where having someone like Koi can really help you get back on your feet. I think it meant a lot that Yaguchi had friends who always enjoyed listening to him talk, whether it was about art or anything else. In a time where he felt that no one would understand him, Koi assured him that that wasn't the case. More importantly, it let him know that all his hard work wasn't for nothing. Koi told Yaguchi that he should use his communication skills to tell people how he feels and strengthen what he wants to express. Instead of hiding his weaknesses, Yaguchi can turn them into his greatest strength. Now this is where I want to talk about the anime, because having read the manga, there were a lot of things cut out that really hurt Yaguchi's development. The biggest difference is that a lot of the inner dialogue was left out, as well as some smaller scenes here and there. In the anime, I didn't feel the same sense of build-up to his character. The manga shows him as a standoffish kid who thinks he knows everything. There were many points where he expressed how dumb it was to pursue art in the first place. He'll be fine just as long as he gets good grades. That's what made his transition into art that much more real, because you got to see how indifferent he was towards it in the past, and how the words from his art teacher really stuck with him. In the anime, I felt like he just sorta got into it because the story said so. With that said, I think it's important to look at this version of Yaguchi as someone who doesn't know what they want to do with their life. He isn't the stuck-up kid in the manga. Instead, he's looking for something to fill the emptiness in his heart. That's when he first saw Mori's painting and became entranced with its beauty. While the manga made his fight with Ryuji real in a sense that he meant what he said, the anime makes him sound more hesitant, as if he's hiding behind what he should do rather than what he wants to do. He joins the art club because he finally found his calling, whereas in the manga, he learned that there was more than meets the eye when it comes to art. His interaction with Yotosuke can also be interpreted differently. In the manga, Yaguchi was offended because we've seen how much he's practiced to get better. While the same could be said in the anime, there's still that feeling of, well, he's only doing art for story reasons. Just as Yotosuke said, he didn't have to choose art, but he did for some reason. His talk with Koi also gave me two different interpretations. In the manga, I still felt that Yaguchi wanted to pursue art, but he hit a wall that he couldn't overcome. In the anime, it felt like Yaguchi was second-guessing himself. When I watched episode 7 for the first time, I couldn't shake off the feeling that he was just forcing himself to draw. Did he still want to pursue art? Was this really something he wanted to do? And what would happen if he just gave up? The reason I'm bringing this up is not because I think the manga is better than the anime or vice versa. I think both versions have their merits, and I think it's best for you to view both of them as their own story. Blue Period is a story of self-discovery, illustrating the struggle between hard work and natural talent. Nothing in life is going to come handed to you on a silver platter, but that shouldn't give you a reason to stop trying. Eventually, you will make it to where you want to be. The first step is always going to be the toughest, but it's better to fail knowing that you tried rather than not trying at all.